The whispers started the day Victoria Kendrick turned 32, though she suspected they had been there all along, just quieter. She stood in the general store in Elko, Nevada, her gloved hands resting on the counter as Mr. Henderson tallied her purchases with agonizing slowness, and she could feel the weight of Mrs. Patterson's stare from across the room like a physical thing pressing against her shoulders. "Such a shame," Mrs. Patterson said to her companion, not even bothering to lower her voice. "A woman her age, still unmarried. Time has passed her by, I'm afraid. No decent man wants a wife who's practically an old maid." Victoria's spine stiffened, but she kept her eyes forward. She had heard variations of this sentiment for the past 2 years, ever since she had crossed the invisible threshold of 30 without a husband or even a serious suitor. The fact that she had spent those years caring for her dying mother seemed to matter little to the good people of Elko. All they saw was a woman who had somehow failed at her most basic purpose. "That will be $4.20, Miss Kendrick," Mr. Henderson said, his voice kind but his eyes pitying. That look was almost worse than the gossip. Victoria counted out the money from her small purse, gathered her parcels, and walked out into the harsh Nevada sunshine of August 1876. The heat shimmered off the dirt road, and she could see the Sierra Nevada mountains in the distance, purple and hazy against the blue sky. Those mountains had always called to her, promised something beyond the confines of this small town and its smaller minds. Her modest house sat at the edge of town, a 2-room dwelling her father had built before consumption took him when Victoria was barely 15. Her mother had lingered another 17 years, growing frailer with each passing season, until last winter when she had finally slipped away during a cold February night. Victoria had held her hand until the end, had whispered that it was all right to let go, and had buried her beside Victoria's father in the windswept cemetery on the hill. Now she was alone, truly, completely alone, and at 32 the town had decided her fate was sealed. Victoria set her parcels on the kitchen table and untied her bonnet, letting her dark auburn hair fall loose around her shoulders. It was still thick and lustrous, threaded with only a few strands of silver at the temples. Her face, she knew, showed the lines of hard work and harder grief, but her green eyes were still bright, still curious about the world beyond Elko's borders. She had saved a little money from selling eggs and doing mending work for the wealthier families in town. Not much, but enough to keep herself fed and housed through the coming winter if she was careful. The question that plagued her now was what came after. She could continue this half-life, existing on the margins of a community that had already written her off, or she could take a chance on something different. The advertisement had arrived in last week's newspaper from Sacramento, tucked between notices for patent medicines and farm equipment. Housekeeper wanted for mountain dwelling. Must be hardy, capable, and unbothered by solitude. Widowers and spinsters welcome. Apply to Mr. Ashford Anderson, care of the Elko Post Office. Victoria had read it 3 times before folding the paper and setting it aside. Then she had unfolded it and read it again. The word spinster had jumped out at her, not as an insult but as a simple statement of fact. Whoever had placed this advertisement understood that some women had different paths, different timelines. The phrase, "unbothered by solitude," spoke to her soul. She had written a letter that very evening, keeping it brief and honest. She explained her situation, her skills in cooking and household management, her comfort with hard work and isolation. She had posted it before she could second-guess herself, and then she had waited. 3 days later, a response arrived. The handwriting was bold and angular, the words sparse but not unkind. "Come to the trading post at the base of the Ruby Mountains. 20 miles northeast of Elko on Saturday, August 12th at noon. Ask for Ashford Anderson. We will speak in person. That was tomorrow. Victoria spent the evening preparing, mending her best dress, a simple gray cotton that had seen better days but was clean and well kept, and packing a small bag, in case the interview led to immediate employment. She hardly slept that night, alternating between excitement and terror. What if he was a cruel man? What if the situation was dangerous? What if she was making the biggest mistake of her life? But then she thought of Mrs. Patterson's pitying eyes and the endless, empty years stretching ahead in Elko, and she knew she had to try. The morning dawned clear and hot. Victoria borrowed a horse from her neighbor, Mr. Carlson, who asked no questions but wished her luck with a knowing nod. She set out at dawn, riding northeast along the rough trail that led toward the Ruby Mountains. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, all sagebrush and rocky soil, with the mountains rising like sentinels in the distance. The trading post appeared as a cluster of rough wooden buildings shimmering in the heat. Victoria arrived at 11:30, her dress dusty from the ride and her nerves stretched taut as piano wire. She dismounted, tied her horse to the hitching post, and walked into the dim interior of the main building. A grizzled man behind the counter looked up from his ledger. "Help you, miss?" "I'm looking for Mr. Ashford Anderson," Victoria said, proud that her voice came out steady. The man's eyebrows rose. "You the woman from town, the one who answered his notice?" "I am." He jerked his thumb toward the door. "He's out back checking his supplies. Big fellow, long dark hair, looks like he could wrestle a bear and win. Can't miss him." Victoria's heart hammered as she walked through the trading post and out the back door. The area behind the building was a loading area where wagons brought supplies from the railroad 20 miles south. Several men worked loading crates and barrels, but one man stood apart from the others, and Victoria understood immediately what the clerk had meant. Ashford Anderson was enormous. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and hung past his collar in thick waves that suggested he cut it himself when it got too long. He wore a simple homespun shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and tanned dark from the sun. His face was all hard angles, strong jaw, prominent cheekbones, a nose that had been broken at least once, but his eyes, when he looked up and saw her, were a startling clear gray like winter ice. "Miss Kendrick." His voice was deep, rumbling up from somewhere in his chest. "Mr. Anderson." Victoria forced herself to walk forward with confidence she did not feel. Up close, he was even more imposing, but there was nothing threatening in his stance. If anything, he seemed almost uncomfortable, like a man unused to social interaction. "You came." He sounded surprised. "You asked me to." "Yes, but I thought." He trailed off, studying her with those ice-gray eyes. "You're not what I expected." Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sorry to disappoint you." "The advertisement said spinsters were welcome, but if you've changed your mind, no," he said quickly, holding up one massive hand. "That's not what I meant. I thought you would be older. Harder, you look." He struggled for words. "You look like you should be in a parlor somewhere drinking tea." Despite herself, Victoria laughed. "I assure you, Mr. Anderson, I am quite capable of more than drinking tea. I have spent the last 17 years nursing my mother through her illness while managing a household on very little money. I can cook, clean, mend, preserve food, manage livestock, and shoot a rifle if necessary. I am 32 years old, which the good people of Elko have determined is far too old to be of interest to any man, but I believe it makes me precisely old enough to know my own mind and capabilities." Something shifted in Ashford's expression. The wariness softened, replaced by something that might have been respect. 32, he repeated. The same age as my late wife when she passed. Everyone said I should find a younger woman to replace her, someone who could give me more years. But I don't want a girl. I want someone who has lived, who understands that life is hard and beautiful and short. The honesty in his words struck Victoria silent for a moment. Around them, the other men continued their work, but it felt as though she and Ashford stood in a bubble of quiet understanding. "Tell me about the position," Victoria said finally. Ashford nodded toward a bench in the shade, and they sat. He kept a respectful distance, but Victoria could feel the warmth radiating from his large frame. "I live about 10 miles up in the mountains," he began, pointing toward the Ruby Range. "Built the cabin myself 8 years ago when I married Sarah. She died 3 years back in childbirth, along with the baby. Since then, I've been living alone, coming down to the trading post once a month for supplies." "I'm sorry for your loss," Victoria said softly. He acknowledged this with a slight nod. "I need help. The cabin is falling into disrepair because I spend all my time trapping and hunting to make a living. I eat poorly because I'm a terrible cook. The place is lonely and isolated, and the winters are brutal. I can offer room and board and $30 a month. It's hard work, and you would be miles from any other human being except me." "What are you not telling me?" Victoria asked. Ashford's eyes snapped to her face. "What makes you think there's more?" "Because everyone has secrets, Mr. Anderson, and you have the look of a man carrying something heavy." For a long moment he simply stared at her. Then he sighed, a sound like wind through trees. "I'm not an easy man to live with. I'm quiet, sometimes for days at a time. I have dark moods in the winter when the snow piles high and the memories get loud. I'm rough around the edges, and I've forgotten most of what civilized people consider proper behavior. Some folks in these parts think I'm half wild, and they might be right. But you're honest," Victoria said. "I try to be." She took a deep breath. "Mr. Anderson, I appreciate your candor. Let me be equally honest with you. I am tired of being pitied. I am tired of being invisible. I want to feel useful again, to have a purpose beyond waiting to grow old in a town that has already decided I have no value. If you are offering me a position where my age and unmarried status are assets rather than failures, then I am interested. Very interested." Ashford was quiet for so long that Victoria began to worry she had said too much. Then he stood, unfolding to his full impressive height, and extended his hand. "The job is yours if you want it, Miss Kendrick. We can leave today if you're ready, or you can take some time to settle your affairs in town." Victoria stood and placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle despite the obvious strength in his fingers. A strange sensation fluttered through her chest, something she had not felt in years, if ever. "I have very little to settle," she said. "I can be ready to leave by tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning, then. Meet me here at dawn. Wear sturdy clothes and bring only what you can carry in a pack. The trail up the mountain is too rough for a wagon." They shook on it, and Victoria rode back to Elko in a daze of anticipation and nervousness. That evening, she packed her few belongings, wrote a note for Mr. Carlson explaining that she had taken employment, and he could sell her house and possessions to cover any debts she owed him, and tried to sleep. She was at the trading post before dawn, wearing her oldest dress and her mother's sturdy boots. Ashford was already there, checking the straps on 2 horses loaded with supplies. He looked at her pack and nodded approvingly. "Travel light. Good. It's a hard climb." He helped her mount one of the horses, his hand steady and impersonal, and then swung onto his own mount with easy grace despite his size. They set off into the gray pre-dawn light, heading up a narrow trail that wound into the mountains. The ride took most of the day. The trail was indeed rough, sometimes barely visible among the rocks and scrub pine. Ashford led the way, silent and sure, occasionally looking back to make sure Victoria was managing. She refused to complain about the heat or the aching of her muscles, determined to prove she was as hardy as she had claimed. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat some jerky and hard biscuits. Ashford shared his canteen with her, and Victoria noticed the way he scanned the landscape constantly, alert to any danger. Out here, she realized, he was completely in his element. The awkwardness she had sensed at the trading post had vanished. This was his world. How much farther? She asked. Another 3 hours. We will make it before dark. They continued, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew cooler, scented with pine and something wild Victoria could not name. She saw a deer watching them from the shadows and once, a golden eagle circling overhead. The beauty of it all took her breath away. The cabin appeared just as the sun began to set, nestled in a small valley with a stream running nearby. It was larger than Victoria had expected, built from thick logs chinked with mud, with a stone chimney rising from one end. A small barn stood nearby, and there was a vegetable garden that had clearly been neglected. "Home," Ashford said simply, dismounting. He helped Victoria down and she stood on shaky legs, taking in her new surroundings. The mountains rose on all sides, painted gold and purple by the setting sun. The silence was profound, broken only by the babble of the stream and the whisper of wind through the pines. "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. Ashford looked pleased. "I will show you inside." The cabin's interior was dim and dusty but solidly built. There was one large main room with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs and shelves lining the walls. A ladder led to a sleeping loft. Through a doorway, Victoria could see a smaller room with a bed covered in furs. "That was Sarah's and mine," Ashford said, following her gaze. "I sleep in the loft now. You can have the bedroom." "I can't take your room," Victoria protested. "You can and you will. It has a door for privacy. The loft doesn't. I won't have you uncomfortable." There was no arguing with the finality in his tone. Victoria set down her pack and looked around at the layer of dust on every surface, the cobwebs in the corners, the general air of neglect. "I will need water and rags," she said, rolling up her sleeves. "Miss Kendrick, you just rode for 10 hours. You should rest." "Mr. Anderson, I cannot rest in a dusty cabin. I will go mad. Please let me clean." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "There are buckets by the stream. I will bring water." They worked together as the last light faded from the sky. Ashford built a fire in the hearth and lit several lanterns, then hauled bucket after bucket of cold stream water while Victoria scrubbed and swept. She found linens in a trunk, musty but still good, and made up the bed in the small room. She wiped down the shelves and table, shook out the rugs and banished the cobwebs. Ashford watched her work with something like wonder in his eyes. "I had forgotten what it feels like to have someone care for a place," he said quietly. By the time Victoria finished, it was full dark outside. She was exhausted, filthy, and ravenously hungry. Ashford had prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork, and they ate in companionable silence at the newly cleaned table. "This is good," Victoria said, surprised. "I can manage the basics when I have to," Ashford replied. "But I'm looking forward to eating something that doesn't come from a tin." Victoria smiled. "I will cook breakfast in the morning. Do you have eggs? Chickens in the barn, 4 of them. They're half wild, but they lay well enough." After the meal, Ashford showed Victoria where everything was: the root cellar, the woodpile, the well he had dug near the cabin. He moved through the darkness with easy confidence, and Victoria realized she would need to learn to navigate this new world without the benefit of street lamps and familiar landmarks. "I will leave you to rest," Ashford said when they returned to the cabin. "If you need anything in the night, just call out. I'm a light sleeper." "Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for all of this." He paused at the base of the ladder. "Miss Kendrick, we're going to be living in close quarters. Might be easier if you called me Ashford. Only if you call me Victoria." "Victoria," he repeated, as if testing the name. "It suits you. Strong and proper." He climbed to the loft before she could respond, and Victoria retreated to her small room. She changed into her nightgown by candlelight, marveling at how strange and new everything felt. Through the thin walls, she could hear Ashford moving around in the loft, the creak of wood as he settled onto his bedroll. She blew out the candle and lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the mountain night. An owl hooted somewhere nearby. The stream burbled endlessly. And above it all, the vast silence pressed down like a blanket. Victoria fell asleep with a smile on her face, feeling more alive than she had in years. The next days fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Victoria rose at dawn to find Ashford already up, splitting wood or checking his traps. She would make breakfast flapjacks, eggs, bacon when they had it, and they would eat together as the sun rose over the mountains. Ashford was a man of few words in the morning, but he always thanked her for the meal before heading out to his work. Victoria spent her days transforming the cabin. She mended the curtains and made new ones from fabric she found in Sarah's trunk. She reorganized the shelves, bringing order to the chaos of Ashford's bachelor existence. She weeded the garden and coaxed it back to life, planting late-season vegetables that might survive until the first frost. She gathered berries from the bushes near the stream and made preserves, filling the cabin with sweet, fruity smells in the evenings. Ashford would return, often with game rabbits, quail, once a young deer. He taught Victoria how to skin and dress the meat, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he showed her the proper technique. She learned to cure hams and make sausage, to render fat for cooking, to waste nothing. They talked more as the days passed. Ashford told her about his life before the mountains, a childhood on a farm in Missouri, the restlessness that drove him west, the years he spent as a fur trapper in the Rockies before settling in Nevada. Victoria shared her own story, the slow sorrow of watching her parents die, the suffocating expectations of small-town life. "Do you miss it?" Ashford asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. "The town, I mean. Other people." Victoria considered this. "I miss the idea of community. But the reality of it, the judgment and gossip and narrow thinking, no, I don't miss that at all. Here, I feel like I can breathe." "I know what you mean," Ashford said. "That's why I stay up here. Too many people make me feel trapped. Were you always this way?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah used to say I had a wild heart. Even when we lived down in the valley, I would disappear into the mountains for days at a time. She understood, never made me feel guilty for needing space. I think that's why I loved her." It was the first time he had spoken of his late wife in any detail, and Victoria sensed the trust in the sharing. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. "We had 5 good years together before the pregnancy." She was so happy about the baby, even though the midwife warned her she was small-hipped and might have trouble. She insisted everything would be fine. His voice roughened. It wasn't. The baby was breech, and she labored for 2 days before they both just slipped away. "I was holding her hand when she died, and I have never felt so helpless in my entire life." Victoria's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry, Ashford. It's been 3 years. Time is supposed to heal, but some days it feels like it just happened." He looked at her, his face shadowed in the twilight. "Having you here has helped more than I expected. The cabin feels alive again." Something warm bloomed in Victoria's chest at his words. She had been at the cabin for 3 weeks now, and each day she felt more at home. More than that, she found herself watching for Ashford's return each evening, felt her pulse quicken when she heard his footsteps on the porch. He was unlike any man she had ever known, strong and capable, but also gentle, quiet but deeply thoughtful. And when he looked at her with those ice-gray eyes, she felt seen in a way she never had before. But she was his housekeeper, nothing more. She reminded herself of this every time her thoughts wandered into dangerous territory. September arrived, bringing cooler nights and the first hint of autumn color in the aspens. Ashford began preparing for winter in earnest, chopping and stacking cords of firewood, checking the roof for leaks, hunting larger game to smoke and store. Victoria helped however she could, learning skills she had never needed in town. One afternoon, Ashford asked if she knew how to shoot. "I've fired my father's old rifle a few times," Victoria said, "but I'm not what you would call skilled." "You need to be able to protect yourself if something happens to me," Ashford said seriously. "Mountain lions, bears, even wolves sometimes come around, and there are men who pass through these mountains who are more dangerous than any animal." He spent the afternoon teaching her to shoot properly, standing behind her to adjust her stance, his large hands guiding her arms. Victoria tried to focus on his instructions, but she was acutely aware of his nearness, the warmth of his body, the scent of pine and leather that clung to him. "Breathe out slowly," he murmured near her ear. "Squeeze the trigger, don't pull." She followed his guidance and the rifle cracked. Downrange, the tin can Ashford had set on a log flew into the air. "Perfect," he said, and the pride in his voice made Victoria's heart soar. They practiced until she could hit the target consistently. When they finished, Ashford looked at her with new respect. "You're a quick learner," he said. "That's good. Makes me worry less about leaving you alone. Do you worry about me?" The question slipped out before Victoria could stop it. Ashford's expression softened. "More than I probably should." That night, Victoria lay awake in her small room, replaying his words. More than I probably should. What did that mean? Was she reading too much into a simple statement of concern for an employee's safety? But there were other moments, small things she had noticed. The way Ashford always served her the best portions at meals. How he had spent an entire day building her a better clothesline without being asked. The time she had stumbled on the trail and he had caught her, his arms strong and sure around her, and held on just a moment longer than necessary. Victoria pressed her hands to her warm cheeks. She was being foolish. She was a 32-year-old spinster housekeeper, not some young girl who could afford romantic fantasies. Ashford had loved his wife deeply. He had hired Victoria because he needed help, not because he wanted a companion. She resolved to push these feelings aside and focus on her work. But the feelings refused to be pushed aside. They grew stronger as October painted the mountains in brilliant golds and reds. Victoria found herself laughing more, smiling at Ashford's dry observations about the stubborn chickens, or the way the squirrels raided his traps. He, in turn, seemed to relax around her, talking more, even joking occasionally in his serious way. One evening, Victoria made an apple pie from the dried fruit she had been saving. Ashford took one bite and closed his eyes. "This tastes like heaven," he said. "I haven't had pie since Sarah died." "Then I will make you pie every week," Victoria said impulsively. When he opened his eyes, there was something intense in his gaze that made her breath catch. "Victoria, I need to ask you something." "Yes. Are you happy here? truly happy. Because if you're not, if this is too hard or too lonely, I need to know. I can take you back to town before the snows come. Victoria set down her fork. Why would you think I'm unhappy? Because this isn't the life you were meant for. You're educated, refined. You should be in a proper house with neighbors and society, not stuck on a mountain with a rough man who barely knows how to make conversation. The pain in his voice startled her. Ashford Anderson, you listened to me. I chose to come here. I chose this life. And I have been happier in these past 2 months than I was in the previous 10 years in that town. I'm not stuck, I'm free. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be. Even though you're with me. The question was quiet, almost vulnerable. Especially because I'm with you, Victoria said before she could second-guess herself. You make me feel valued for who I am, not for who people think I should be. You treat me like an equal, not a charity case or a failure. She stopped, terrified she had already said too much. Ashford stood slowly, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. His gray eyes searched her face. I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to know I expect nothing in return. You work for me, and that power difference means I have no right to say this. But I can't keep it inside anymore. Victoria's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. I'm falling in love with you, Ashford said simply. Maybe I have been since that first day at the trading post when you told me you were exactly old enough to know your own mind. You're strong and capable and kind. You've brought light back into this cabin, into my life. When I come home each evening, I'm not coming back to a house, I'm coming back to you. And I know I have no right to feel this way, that you probably think of me as just your employer, but I had to tell you the truth. Tears sprang to Victoria's eyes. You think I see you as just an employer. What else would you see? I see the man who trusted me when no one else would. The man who treats me with respect and kindness. The man who makes me feel beautiful even in my oldest dress with dirt under my fingernails. She reached out and touched his face, rough with stubble. I see the man I love. Because I do love you, Ashford. I think I started falling the moment you said I was exactly what you needed, not too old or too anything. Just right. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Ashford cupped her face in his large, calloused hands and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might vanish. But when Victoria leaned into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, the kiss deepened. It was nothing like Victoria had imagined kisses would be. It was better. It was warm and urgent and filled with all the longing they had both been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ashford rested his forehead against hers. I don't want you to be my housekeeper anymore, he said. Victoria's stomach dropped. What? I want you to be my wife, if you'll have me. I know I'm not sophisticated or educated. I can't give you a fine house or fancy things, but I can love you with everything I am. I can protect you and cherish you and make sure you never feel invisible again. He pulled back to look at her. Victoria Kendrick, will you marry me? Joy flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. Yes. Yes, Ashford, I will marry you. He kissed her again, then stood and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around despite the small space. Victoria laughed, giddy and breathless, and when he set her down they were both grinning like fools. We will have to go down to Elko to make it legal, Ashford said. But Victoria, in my heart, you're already my wife. And you're already my husband, she replied. They sat together on the porch late into the night, wrapped in a blanket against the October chill, talking about their future. Ashford told her about improvements he wanted to make to the cabin, maybe adding another room. Victoria shared her dream of expanding the garden, maybe getting a milk cow. They talked about everything and nothing, just reveling in the freedom to speak their hearts. When Victoria finally retired to her room, she felt as though she was floating. She lay in bed, listening to Ashford move around in the loft above, and smiled into the darkness. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Tomorrow, she would wake as a woman engaged to be married, not because she had to, not because it was expected, but because she had found a man who loved her exactly as she was. The next morning, Ashford announced they would go to Elko in 3 days to arrange the wedding. "I want to do this properly," he said. "I want everyone in that town to see that you're not too old or too anything. You're perfect, and I'm the luckiest man alive that you chose me." Those 3 days were both the longest and shortest of Victoria's life. She and Ashford were careful to maintain propriety. She still slept in her room, he in the loft, but the air between them hummed with new energy. He found excuses to touch her hand in passing. She caught herself staring at him while he worked. They stole kisses when they could, sweet and promising. On the morning they were to leave, Victoria dressed in her best gown and tried to tame her hair into something respectable. When she emerged from her room, Ashford was waiting in his cleanest shirt and trousers, his long hair tied back. He looked uncomfortable in the more formal attire, but when he saw her, his face lit up. "You're beautiful," he said. "You clean up well yourself," Victoria replied, straightening his collar. The ride down the mountain felt different than the journey up. Then, Victoria had been nervous and uncertain. Now, she rode beside the man she loved, toward a future she had never dared imagine. They reached Elko by mid-afternoon and went directly to the minister's house. Reverend Thompson answered the door, his eyebrows rising in surprise when he saw Victoria. "Miss Kendrick, we heard you had left town." "There were all sorts of rumors. I took employment as Mr. Anderson's housekeeper," Victoria said calmly. "And now we're here to arrange our wedding." The Reverend's jaw dropped. Your wedding, that's right," Ashford said, his hand finding Victoria's, "as soon as it can be arranged." Reverend Thompson looked between them, clearly struggling to process this information. "Well, that is, of course. When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow, if possible," Victoria said. "Tomorrow." "Miss Kendrick, surely you want more time to prepare. We want to be married," Ashford interrupted, his voice firm but polite. "Tomorrow, next week, it makes no difference to us, but we'd prefer sooner." The Reverend sputtered a bit more but eventually agreed to perform the ceremony in 2 days, which would give them time to post the banns as required by law. As they left the minister's house, Victoria spotted Mrs. Patterson across the street, staring at them with her mouth open. "Let her stare," Ashford murmured, pulling Victoria close. "Let them all stare." They spent the night at the small boarding house in town, in separate rooms to maintain appearances. Victoria lay awake, too excited to sleep, thinking about how much had changed in just 3 months. She had come to this town as a woman dismissed and pitied. She would leave it as a bride, married to a man who saw her value. The next day, they returned to the trading post to purchase supplies and spread the word about the wedding. The clerk, the same one who had directed Victoria to Ashford that first day, shook his hand enthusiastically. "About time you found someone," he said. "And Miss Kendrick here seems like good people." "She's the best people," Ashford corrected, looking at Victoria with such open adoration that she blushed. Word of the wedding spread quickly. By the time they returned to Elko the following morning for the ceremony, a small crowd had gathered at the church, drawn by curiosity more than goodwill. Victoria recognized many faces from town, saw the speculation in their eyes. She wore the same gray dress she had worn to meet Ashford, but she had washed and pressed it until it looked almost new. She had no veil, no fancy accessories, but when Ashford saw her walking toward him down the aisle, She felt beautiful. The ceremony was simple and short. They spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, and when Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Ashford kissed her thoroughly, unconcerned with the scandalized gasps from some of the older ladies. "Let them talk," he whispered against her lips. "You're mine now." "And you're mine," Victoria replied. They signed the register, accepted a few polite congratulations from the more charitable townspeople, and rode out of Elko before noon. As they climbed back into the mountains, Victoria looked back at the town one last time. "Any regrets?" Ashford asked. "Not a single one." The cabin welcomed them home like an old friend. Ashford carried Victoria over the threshold despite her protests that she was too heavy, and she laughed as he set her down in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Anderson," he said. "Mrs. Anderson," Victoria repeated, testing the name. "I like the sound of that." That night, Victoria moved her belongings from the small bedroom to the loft, where Ashford had made up the space with clean linens and blankets. He had been sleeping in the main bedroom for the past few days to give her privacy, but now they would share the space properly. As husband and wife, they came together with tenderness and passion, discovering each other in the golden glow of lamplight. Ashford was gentle despite his size and strength, his hands reverent on her skin. Victoria had expected nervousness, but instead she felt only rightness, as though this was exactly where she was meant to be. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Ashford's large frame curled protectively around hers. "I never thought I would feel this way again," he said into her hair. "After Sarah, I thought that part of my life was over, but you've shown me that the heart has room for more than one great love." "Do you think she would approve?" Victoria asked softly. "I think she would be happy that I've found someone who makes me want to live again, not just exist." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I think she would have liked you." The days that followed were some of the happiest of Victoria's life. She and Ashford fell into a new rhythm, one built on partnership and love. They worked together during the day and came together at night, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal dedication. October gave way to November, and the first snows began to fall. Ashford had been right about the isolation some days. The world beyond the cabin disappeared entirely into white. But Victoria found she didn't mind. She had everything she needed right here: a warm home, plenty of food, and a husband who loved her. They spent the long winter evenings reading aloud to each other from the few books in the cabin, or simply talking about anything and everything. Ashford taught her to play chess on a set he had carved himself. Victoria taught him songs her mother had sung when she was young. They made love frequently, urgently, as though they were making up for all the lonely years before they found each other. One night in late December, as a blizzard raged outside, Victoria sat on Ashford's lap in front of the fire, his arms wrapped around her waist. "I have something to tell you," she said, nervous and excited in equal measure. "What is it?" "I think I'm with child." Ashford went very still. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I'm 6 weeks late with my courses, and I've been feeling sick in the mornings." "I know it's soon," but he turned her in his arms so he could see her face. "Are you happy about it?" "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "I know Sarah's pregnancy ended tragically, and I know that must frighten you, but yes, I'm happy." "Are you?" For a moment, fear flickered in Ashford's eyes. Then it was replaced by something fiercer: determination. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "But I'm also so happy I can barely breathe. We'll get through this, Victoria. I won't lose you." "You won't," she promised, touching his face. "I'm strong and we'll be careful. We have months to prepare." Ashford pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I love you so much," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You and this baby. I will protect you both with everything I have." True to his word, Ashford became almost overprotective as the pregnancy progressed. He insisted Victoria rest more, forbade her from lifting anything heavy, and fretted constantly about her health. Victoria found it both endearing and exasperating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested when he tried to stop her from carrying a bucket of water. "Humor me," he said, taking the bucket from her hands. "I need to feel like I'm doing something useful." As winter deepened into January and February, they made plans. Ashford wanted to bring a midwife up from town well before the baby was due, wanted to make sure Victoria had every advantage Sarah had lacked. Victoria agreed, grateful for his caution even when it chafed. The spring of 1877 came slowly, the snow melting in patches to reveal the green underneath. Victoria's belly swelled and she felt the baby move for the first time in March, a flutter like butterfly wings. She guided Ashford's hand to the spot, and when he felt it too, his eyes grew bright with tears. "That's our child," he said wonderingly, "growing inside you." "Our child," Victoria agreed, marveling at the miracle of it. In April, as agreed, Ashford rode down to Elko and returned with Mrs. Cooper, an experienced midwife who had delivered half the babies in the county. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who took one look at Victoria and pronounced her healthy and strong. "You'll do just fine," she said confidently. "I've seen hundreds of births and you have good hips for childbearing. When is this baby due?" "We think late June or early July," Victoria said. "Well, I will stay here from mid-June on, just to be safe. Mr. Anderson is paying me well enough for the inconvenience." Ashford had indeed paid the woman handsomely, though Victoria suspected he would have given everything he owned to ensure her safety. The midwife stayed for a week that first visit, checking Victoria thoroughly and leaving detailed instructions for the coming months. "Send for me when the time comes," she said as she prepared to return to town. "But don't wait too long. Babies come on their own schedule." The weeks that followed seemed to crawl by. Victoria grew larger and more uncomfortable, but she had never felt more alive. Ashford doted on her constantly, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings and building her a more comfortable chair for sitting. He talked to the baby through her belly, telling stories about the mountains and promising to teach the child to hunt and fish and love the wild places. In mid-June, true to her word, Mrs. Cooper returned with her supplies and settled into the small bedroom. Her presence both comforted and unnerved Victoria. It made the approaching birth feel real in a way it hadn't before. "Any day now," the midwife said cheerfully as June gave way to July. "That baby is sitting low and ready." Victoria's labor began on a bright morning in early July, just as the sun was rising over the mountains. The first pain woke her, a tightening across her belly that made her gasp. Ashford, who slept lightly even now, was instantly alert. "Is it time?" he asked. "I think so," Victoria said, gripping his hand as another pain rolled through her. Mrs. Cooper took charge immediately, sending Ashford to boil water and gather clean linens while she examined Victoria. "You're doing well," she said, "but it will be a while yet." First babies usually take their time. She was right. The labor lasted through the day and into the evening, long hours of increasing pain that Victoria endured with gritted teeth. Ashford stayed close, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement even as fear darkened his eyes. "I can't do this," Victoria gasped at one point, exhausted and hurting. "You can," Ashford said fiercely. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this, Victoria. I'm right here with you." As the sun set and the mountains turned purple with twilight, the pains grew closer together. "Mrs. Cooper checked Victoria again and smiled. "It's time to push," she said. On the next pane, bear down as hard as you can. Victoria pushed with everything she had, Ashford's hand gripping hers so tightly she thought her bones might break. She pushed through pain that seemed to split her in two, pushed until she thought she couldn't possibly push anymore. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, a baby's cry pierced the air. "It's a boy," Mrs. Cooper announced, holding up the squirming, wailing infant. A big, healthy boy. Victoria collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Ashford stared at the baby with an expression of pure wonder as the midwife cleaned the child and wrapped him in a soft blanket. "Here's your son, Mrs. Cooper said, placing the baby in Victoria's arms. He was perfect. Red-faced and angry at being born, but perfect. Victoria studied his tiny features, the shock of dark hair, the scrunched-up face, the miniature fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength. "He's beautiful," she whispered. Ashford sat on the edge of the bed, his large frame shaking. "He's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe," his voice broke and he leaned down to kiss Victoria's forehead. Thank you for this gift." "We did it together," Victoria said, looking up at him with exhaustion and joy mingling in her expression. "We made him together." Mrs. Cooper checked Victoria thoroughly and pronounced both mother and baby in excellent health. "He's a big one," she said. "Nearly 9 pounds, I'd wager." "No wonder you had a hard time." "What will you name him?" Ashford asked, unable to take his eyes off his son. They had discussed names for weeks but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at this new life they had created, Victoria knew exactly what felt right. "Alexander," she said. "Alexander Anderson. We can call him Alex." "Alexander," Ashford repeated, testing the name. "I like it. It's strong. He will need to be strong growing up in these mountains." "He'll be strong like his father," Victoria said, touching Ashford's face. Little Alex proved to be a robust baby with healthy lungs and a good appetite. Victoria recovered quickly from the birth, aided by the expert care of Mrs. Cooper, who stayed for 2 weeks to ensure all was well before returning to town. "You're a natural mother," the midwife said as she prepared to leave. "That boy is lucky to have you both." The first months of Alex's life were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. He demanded constant attention, waking several times each night to feed. But Victoria and Ashford took turns walking him when he was fussy, and they marveled together at each tiny milestone: his first smile, the way his eyes began to focus and follow movement, the strength in his grip. Ashford was a devoted father, surprisingly gentle with the tiny baby. He would hold Alex against his broad chest and sing old trapping songs in his deep, rumbling voice until the baby fell asleep. He built a cradle from smooth pine wood, carving animals into the headboard. He stood guard over his small family with fierce protectiveness. "I never knew I could feel this much," he told Victoria one night as they watched Alex sleep. "This much love, this much fear. Every time I look at him, at you, I think about how easily I could lose you both, and it terrifies me." "We're not going anywhere," Victoria assured him, taking his hand. "We're a family now. We're strong together." As summer turned to autumn, they fell into a new rhythm, one that accommodated the needs of a baby. Victoria learned to cook one-handed while holding Alex, to snatch sleep whenever she could, to function on far less rest than she had ever thought possible. Ashford took over even more of the household tasks, determined that Victoria shouldn't exhaust herself. Alex grew quickly, thriving on mountain air and mother's milk. By the time winter snows began to fall again, he was 6 months old, a chubby, happy baby who laughed at his father's silly faces and reached for his mother whenever she came into view. "He has your eyes," Ashford observed one evening, studying his son's face. That same bright green. But he has your strength, Victoria replied, watching Alex grab at Ashford's finger with both hands and try to pull it to his mouth. He's going to be big like you. That second winter was harder than the first, simply because they had a baby to keep warm and safe. But it was also richer, filled with the joy of watching Alex discover the world. His first tooth came in December, accompanied by much fussing and sleepless nights. He began to crawl in January, moving with surprising speed across the cabin floor. "We're in trouble now," Ashford said, watching his son make a determined beeline for the fireplace. He scooped the baby up just in time, earning an indignant squawk. Victoria laughed. "He's curious like his father." "And stubborn like his mother," Ashford added with a grin. By the time Alex celebrated his first birthday in July of 1878, he was walking and babbling constantly, though actual words were still a few weeks away. They had a small celebration, just the three of them, with a special cake Victoria made and a wooden horse Ashford had carved. "Happy birthday, little one," Victoria said, kissing her son's chubby cheek. "You've made this year the best of my life." "The best of both our lives," Ashford corrected, pulling his wife and son into his arms. Life continued in this peaceful pattern. Victoria discovered she was pregnant again in the autumn of 1878, and this time there was no fear, only joy. Their daughter, Amelia, was born in May of 1879, an easier birth than Alex had been. She was smaller and quieter than her brother, with Ashford's gray eyes and a disposition so calm that Victoria sometimes joked she was too good to be real. "She's perfect," Ashford said, cradling his tiny daughter with the same careful gentleness he had shown Alex. Another miracle. 2-year-old Alex was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to touch her soft hair and help with her care. Ashford built an addition onto the cabin to give the growing family more space, working through the summer months while Victoria managed 2 small children. The years passed in a blur of love and laughter and hard work. Alex grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to trap and hunt and read the mountains. Amelia was quieter but equally capable, helping her mother with cooking and gardening as soon as she was old enough. In 1882, Victoria gave birth to twin boys, Daniel and David, who were loud and energetic and kept the entire household in chaos. Ashford built yet another addition to the cabin, which was now a sprawling structure that bore little resemblance to the simple dwelling Victoria had first seen. "We're going to need a second barn at this rate," Ashford joked as he surveyed his growing family. "Are you complaining?" Victoria asked, nursing one twin while Amelia held the other. "Never," he said seriously. "This is everything I never knew I wanted." "You've given me a life I couldn't have imagined, Victoria." "We've given each other that life," she corrected. By 1885, Alex was 8 and already showing signs he would be as tall as his father. Amelia was 6, quiet and thoughtful, with a gift for growing things that made the garden flourish. The twins were 3, identical whirlwinds of energy and mischief. And Victoria, at 41, sometimes felt tired but never regretted a single moment. She and Ashford sat on the porch one evening after putting the children to bed, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. "Do you remember what they used to say?" Victoria asked softly. "That I was too old to marry, that no man would want me." Ashford pulled her close against his side. "I remember thinking they were the biggest fools in Nevada. You weren't too old, you were exactly the right age. Old enough to know yourself, to know what you wanted. Old enough to build a real life with, not just play at one." "I think about the woman I was when I came here," Victoria said. "So defeated, so sure my life was over at 32, and now look at us." 4 beautiful children, a home we built together, love that grows stronger every year. You saved me, Ashford said quietly. I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You brought me back to life, Victoria. You and these children, you're everything. She turned to kiss him, the kiss still sparking with the passion that had never faded between them. And you showed me that there was more to life than what everyone said I was supposed to want. You gave me adventure and purpose and love beyond measure. They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky. From inside the cabin, they could hear Alex reading to his younger siblings, his voice already deepening toward manhood. The twins giggled at something, and Amelia shushed them gently. We did good, Ashford said, listening to the sounds of their family. We did very good, Victoria agreed. The years continued to roll past. Alex grew to be even taller than Ashford, though not quite as broad, and at 18 he began making trips down to Elko to trade furs and supplies. Amelia, at 16, had suitors despite the family's isolation, young men who made the journey up the mountain in hopes of winning her quiet smile. The twins were 13, still inseparable and still causing good-natured trouble wherever they went. In 1893, Victoria turned 49, and she and Ashford celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. They looked back on all they had built together, the expanded cabin that was now a true homestead, the children who were growing into capable adults, the life they had carved out of the wilderness through love and determination. I would do it all again, Victoria said as they danced together in the main room, the children clapping and laughing around them. Every single moment I would choose again. As would I, Ashford said, still as strong and vital as he had been when she met him, though his dark hair was now threaded with silver. You're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Victoria Anderson. Still exactly the right age, exactly the right woman for me. Their children eventually grew and made their own choices. Alex built a cabin a few miles away with his wife, a cheerful woman from Elko who had stolen his heart. Amelia married a kind-hearted rancher and moved to a valley 20 miles south. The twins stayed close to home, one becoming a guide for travelers through the mountains, the other a skilled craftsman who built furniture and tools. Victoria and Ashford became grandparents many times over, and their cabin became a gathering place where the whole family came together for holidays and celebrations. They grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. Each shared joy and sorrow. When Victoria was 65 and Ashford 67, they sat on their porch, the same porch where he had first told her he was falling in love with her, and watched the sunset over the mountains they had never left. "You have any regrets?" Ashford asked, his hand finding hers as it always did. Victoria thought about the girl she had been in Elko, listening to whispers that she was too old, too unwanted, too late. She thought about the woman who had taken a chance on a mountain man's advertisement. She thought about all the years between, filled with love and children and hard work and joy. "Not a single one," she said, squeezing his hand. "They said I was too old to marry, too old to start a new life. But you knew better. You knew I was exactly the right age for you, exactly the right woman. And you were exactly the right man for me. Still are," Ashford said, pulling her close to kiss her temple. "Will be until my last breath and beyond." They sat together as the light faded. Two people who had found each other when the world said it was too late, who had built a life that proved everyone wrong. The mountains stood eternal around them, the same mountains that had witnessed their first meeting, their wedding, the birth of their children, and all the quiet, precious moments in between. And as the stars emerged in the vast Nevada sky, Victoria thought about how grateful she was that she had been brave enough to answer that advertisement, to take a chance on a man who saw her value when others saw only her age. She had found not just employment, but love. Not just shelter, but home. Not just survival, but a life worth living. In the end, that was all that mattered. They had loved deeply, raised their family well, and built something that would last long after they were gone. And if Victoria closed her eyes, she could still feel that first flutter of hope she had experienced when Ashford looked at her with his ice-gray eyes and said she was exactly what he needed. She opened her eyes and found him watching her, that same look of wonder and love on his weathered face that he had worn on their wedding day. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you more," he replied, as he always did. "Impossible," she countered, their familiar exchange bringing smiles to both their faces. They stayed on the porch until the night grew too cold, then went inside to the cabin that had become their sanctuary, their haven, their home. The fire crackled in the hearth, warming the space that had held so much life and love over the decades. As they prepared for bed, moving in the comfortable synchronicity of long partnership, Victoria caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror by the wash basin. Her face was lined now, her auburn hair gone silver, her body bearing the marks of age and childbearing. But when she looked at her reflection, she didn't see a woman who had missed her chance or wasted her youth. She saw a woman who had been loved fiercely and had loved in return. A woman who had raised 4 children in the wilderness and lived to see them thrive. A woman who had been told she was too old but had proven that age was irrelevant when you found the right person. Ashford came up behind her, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. He was silver-haired too, his face creased by sun and time, but his gray eyes were the same as they had always been, clear and steady and full of love. "Still beautiful," he murmured, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Still mine," she replied, leaning back into his embrace. They climbed into bed together, as they had done for over 2 decades, and Victoria settled into the curve of Ashford's body with a contented sigh. This was home. Not the cabin, not the mountains, but the warmth of his arms, the steady beat of his heart against her back, the knowledge that they had chosen each other and never regretted it. "Good night, my love," Ashford whispered into her hair. "Good night," Victoria replied, already drifting toward sleep, safe and cherished. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. The mountains stood guard over the little homestead, as they had for all these years, silent witnesses to a love that had defied expectations and flourished against all odds. And in the morning, Victoria and Ashford would wake together as they always did, ready to face another day in the life they had built. There would be chores to do, perhaps visitors from one of their children, the simple pleasures of shared meals and quiet conversation. The years stretched ahead, however many they had left, and they would face them together. Because Victoria had learned something important in her journey from unwanted spinster to beloved wife and mother. It was never too late to start over, never too late to find love, never too late to choose a different path. The people who whispered that she was too old had been wrong. She had been exactly the right age, old enough to know her worth, young enough to embrace adventure, wise enough to recognize true love when it found her. And Ashford had been right too. She was exactly what he needed, not in spite of her age but because of it. They had met as fully formed people, bringing their whole selves to the relationship, and that had made all the difference. As Victoria finally surrendered to sleep, wrapped in her husband's arms, she smiled. This was the happy ending she had never dared to dream of, not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real. They had built their happiness together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And that, Victoria thought as sleep claimed her, was the greatest adventure of all. The years that followed were gentle ones. Victoria and Ashford watched their grandchildren grow, passing on the skills and wisdom they had accumulated over decades of mountain living. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered the inevitable losses that came with age, and held fast to each other through it all. When Ashford passed away at the age of 73, on a quiet autumn morning with Victoria holding his hand, his last words were of love for her and gratitude for the life they had shared. Victoria grieved deeply, but she also celebrated the incredible gift of having had him in her life. She remained in the cabin they had built together, surrounded by children and grandchildren who refused to let her live alone. And when her own time came, several years later, she went peacefully in her sleep with a smile on her face, her last thoughts of the mountain man who had seen her worth when no one else would. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the valley, the mountains rising majestically all around them. Their children placed a simple marker that read, Ashford and Victoria Anderson. They found each other at exactly the right time. And in the cabin below, life continued. Their descendants stayed on the land, carrying forward the legacy of love and determination that Victoria and Ashford had established. The story of how they met, how she was told she was too old, and he insisted she was exactly right, became family legend, passed down through generations. Because some love stories don't follow the expected timeline. Some love stories begin when the world says it's already too late. And sometimes, those are the best love stories of all, the ones that prove that it's never too late to find exactly what you need, exactly when you need it, with exactly the right person. Victoria and Ashford had found that rare and precious thing, and they had cherished it every day of their lives together. And that, in the end, was the truest happy ending anyone could ask for.